I think effective graphic design is kind of all about context and reality. And what I mean by that, and where a lot of people get it wrong, is people want to ignore the context and the reality of the production so that this standalone artifact isn't compromised. But what that does is it compromises the effectiveness of it. So let's take a really small example of a thing I'm working on right this minute. So I'm working on this little thing, a 3-up flyer. So your basic, like, you print 3 of the same thing on an 8.5 by 11 sheet and you cut it with a paper cutter, possibly yourself. No bleed, no nothing. Because of that, we put a 1/4 inch of white space around each graphic so that if the cut's not totally straight, it's not noticeable, and we know that we can't print to the very edge. So the closer you print to the edge, but without a clean margin, it just looks crappy, right? Someone high up at where I work doesn't like the white borders. So they unilaterally decreed that all the printing would be done through one place. So what happens? We stop putting white borders on stuff because we're told that the amateur hour of bringing this 3-up PDF to Kinko's or whatever they're called now, and having them print it and cut it, that's not happening anymore. So now they can all be full bleed. Except, of course, that our franchisees don't care about the degree of somebody who's being fancy about the borders. So then you design something, it's full bleed, and then someone else, because you're on vacation, comes and asks for it, and now it's got this white border around it. What does that have to do with context and effectiveness and all that? It's like this: I didn't design it with that white border, and I didn't design it with that in mind, so therefore everything got smaller because whoever was asked to quickly put this thing into a different format didn't have time to deal with that stuff. So effectiveness is lost. One part of effectiveness, everything got a little bit smaller. You can argue maybe that's not important, but when the thing is only however wide, 3.5 by 8.5 approximately, that actually does matter. Now let's look at context. I don't know why we're producing these flyers all the time, but what I do know is I don't go into chain restaurants looking for flyers. If I think about normal human being behavior, when do you pick up flyers? You pick them up because the thing is so interesting and exciting looking that it's worth remembering. So for example, I picked up a flyer or a brochure, shockingly enough, for an extreme, what do they call it? Extreme sandbox thing, where like you go and rent a like a ditch digging machine and you go and knock stuff over or crush a car or whatever it is you do. That's worth remembering. A chicken sandwich is not worth remembering. Or it's a band you want to see, or it's a talk you want to see, but it's something that is exciting to you. So as such, you lose effectiveness. And I think this is the biggest thing of working in marketing, is because something has been done before, people continue to do it, and everyone stops thinking like a human being and like a consumer, and instead they're only thinking about checking off these boxes and attempting to prove that they did some work and politicking. Because if anybody was actually trying to move the dial, the first thing they would say is, the company Instagram hasn't been updated in 2 weeks, and yet we're gonna make a laser printed flyer about a sandwich? Nobody in their right mind gives a crap about that. If you wanna be effective, recognize the context, recognize the limitations of the context or the deliverable, and then think like an actual human being. Think about the fact that whatever it is you're making has to actually bring value to an actual human being. That's enough of that little rant. I think one thing that has really benefited me throughout my career as a designer is the fact that I have always tried to have a high degree of empathy for whoever it is that is supposed to be using or making use of the thing that I'm making. I'm not accusing everybody never mind. I actually am accusing everybody in the world of being stupid. I'm gonna take that back. A lot of times I've mistakenly thought that somebody was doing or saying something that was stupid or didn't make sense because they had that same empathy, but that they knew more than me. And what I think I've come to realize is that so many of the people that you interact with, they have common sense. They choose not to use it at any given time. And so, like in marketing departments, it's run amok with this fucking stupidity of just dumb shit that doesn't serve the user, and it ends up not serving the company's purpose. Like, a lot of companies would do really well to ask themselves whether the agencies or designers they're working with are more focused on how that project is going to look in their portfolio than on the effectiveness of the work that they're doing. So for me, my career has been really well served by maintaining as much empathy for that end user as possible. And I don't know if that's because my body of work largely comes out of punk rock or hardcore music, things where marketing should be cool, events should serve the person going to it, not the person putting on the event, and common sense kind of reigns the day. When I was doing experiential work, I had no experience in it whatsoever, but the clients kept coming back for the work, and I think it's because even in the mistakes that I made, and I made mistakes, I was trying to serve them by serving their customer, their guest, their visitor, and holding everything to a really high bar of like I'm not the kind of person that goes to, say, a museum exhibition that's really interactive. I don't actually give a shit about going through the experience. What I'm interested in tends to be the mechanics of the experience, and there's very few exceptions. Dan Graham installations and Yoko Ono installations have largely been the exceptions to me going into something and really experiencing it, because it just doesn't appeal to me. So when I was setting up experiential stuff, I was like, okay, this has to be so good, and that if I went to it and didn't do whatever the interactive part was, I'd still think, oh man, that's cool as shit, or that's awesome. And that largely just comes down to acting like a human being. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everything you make has to be up your alley or to be something that you enjoy, but more like everything needs to have a fundamental logic and not look like a giant stupid ad. And that when you're making an ad, you're making something worth talking about, something worth stopping someone. I mean, this is the whole appeal of social media or Instagram. Our Instagram is obviously promotional. It says the MVA studio. So it's obviously about getting attention for us, but without making ads, by showing a thing we made that we think is awesome, or showing a record sleeve that question mark made back in the day that is incredible, and not ending it with, if you want an awesome record sleeve, come to us. The best advertising is not going to feel like an ad, and I don't mean that it's sneaky or undercover. It's not sponsored content or whatever. It is an awesome thing that is put out by someone because they care about it, which is very common sense. Nobody follows companies on Instagram whose Instagram feed feels like a giant ad, and yet when you're at a company, you attempt to turn the Instagram feed into a giant ad. Empathy. It's the thing to think about. Empathy for the context, and then understanding the limitations of it so that you can do the best possible work within that and be effective, and then understand that being effective is not necessarily always going to be good for your portfolio. It's not always going to be photogenic, and that's that's a price you pay. It's not a reason not to do something the right way. Thanks for driving with me. Boom, 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 boom. I'm trying to think of if there is some stuff that we can promote. How about this? If you want to see a company that appears to be doing empathy, context, effectiveness correctly, check out Imprint Projects. I'm going to put their URL in the show notes. They do incredible experiential work. Also, if you're not familiar with the Red Bull Music Academy that is sadly shutting down, that to me is an awesome example of empathy, common sense, doing shit the right way, not the obvious way, not the tried and true way. All right, thanks a lot for watching.